أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected scholars, elders, my dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So Zulaykha gives Yusuf alayhi salam an ultimatum. After many years of trying to seduce him and entice him, she realizes that she has to now threaten him. She gives him an ultimatum. Either you give in to my demand or you go to prison. And we mentioned last night that Yusuf alayhi salam, for him, the choice was very easy. قال رب السجن أحب إلي مما يدعونني إليه. Prison is preferable to me over what they invite me towards. And lo and behold, Yusuf alayhi salam is now thrown into prison. He is presumably around the age of 18 or 19 years old, and he's thrown mercilessly into the prison. Now you can imagine that he is not being sent to a comfortable prison. He is sent to prison by Aziz, by Zulaykha, and they essentially want him to vanish until the scandal dies down. The Quran mentions in ayah 36, so this is now the beginning of the prison years of Yusuf. وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَانِ. Yusuf alayhi salam is thrown into prison, and at the same time as he is thrown into his cell, there are two young men who are also thrown into prison with him. So these two men, they enter prison at the same time as Yusuf. And the Quran says, وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ. So they were with him. It's not that he just saw them. They would have regular interactions. وَدَخَلَ مَعَهُ السِّجْنَ فَتَيَانِ. قَالَ أَحَدُهُمَا. Now why were these two individuals thrown into prison? It's because they were both accused of trying to poison the king. One of them was the royal baker. He's the one who would bake bread. And the other one was the wine server. So they were accused of plotting to poison the king. And of course, there's no due process in this criminal justice system. The suspicion that you are trying to poison the king is enough to be thrown into prison. قال أحدهما إني أراني أعصر خمرا. When you're in prison, there's nothing to do other than to wait for food and to talk about the dreams that you have. So one of them says, قال أحدهما إني أراني أعصر خمرا. One of them says, I'm having this recurring dream. The Quran says, إني أراني. It's a present tense verb. Right? So this is a recurring dream that this individual is having. He says, I am seeing myself pressing grapes for my master. I see myself, أعصر خمرة. I'm pressing grapes. وقال الآخر إني أراني أحمل فوق رأسي خبزا تأكل الطير من. The other one says, I'm also having a strange recurring dream. I see that there are birds perched on top of my head and they are eating bread. There's bread on top of my head and the birds are eating this bread. نبئنا بتأويله. They say to Yusuf, interpret these dreams for us. إنا نراك من المحسنين. Because we see you as one of the muhsinin. Now the question is, what made them share their dreams with Yusuf? Why did they have this idea? Why are they confident that Yusuf has the ability to interpret dreams? It seems that these individuals, they had a number of dreams that Yusuf had already interpreted for them. So there was a level of trust. And because Yusuf alayhi salam was able to tell them things about their past, things that an ordinary person would not know, they gained confidence that Yusuf has a special ability. Because it doesn't make sense for them to just ask their cellmate randomly, give us the interpretation of these dreams. There was trust that was built. It seems we can infer that Yusuf alayhi salam had interpreted dreams and gave them information that was unknown to an ordinary person. Details about their childhood, their background. So they say to him, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin. We see you to be among the muhsinin. Now when you open up the translation of this, you often find that this part is translated that give us the interpretation of these dreams because we see you as a good doer. Now, why is this translation problematic? Because what does being a good person have to do with the ability to interpret dreams? It seems unlikely that they believe that Yusuf can interpret dreams because he's just a good person. There are many good people who are clueless about the interpretation of dreams. So here, Inna naraka min al-muhsinin, it likely means we see you to be a knowledgeable person. Because in the Arabic language, muhsin can also mean a person of deep knowledge. For example, we have a narration where a companion of Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi, comes to the Imam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. His name is Hammad ibn Isa. Hammad ibn Isa, he comes to the Imam and the Imam asks him, Tuhsin and tusalli. Do you know how to pray? Tuhsin. So tuhsin also means to know. So here they ask Yusuf, can you interpret this dream that we have, these dreams that we're having? Because we see you to be among those who know. You have knowledge of the interpretation of dreams. So both of them, they share their dream. One says, I see myself pressing grapes. The other one says, I see that there is bread on top of my head and the birds are eating from this bread. Now, Yusuf alayhi salam, we do know for certain that in prison, he used to go out of his way to look after the other prisoners. So There is no doubt that he was among the Muhsinin in the sense that he was a good doer. He was a person of deep knowledge, but he was not someone who felt that he was above others. Even though he is a prophet, the narrations tell us about the lengths that he would go to serve the other prisoners. For example, we have a narration from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi, where the Imam describes to us some of the things that Yusuf used to do in prison that speak to his character, that demonstrate his selflessness. Imam al-Sadiq says, كَانَ يُوَسِّعُ الْمَجْلِسِ. These prison cells were very small. And oftentimes, the prison guards would move the prisoners around. So Imam al-Sadiq says, كَانَ يُوَسِّعُ الْمَجْلِسِ. If there is a prisoner who's walking into a room, and let's say the room is packed, there's nowhere to sit, the first one to get up and to give space to people is Yusuf. He was selfless even when he was dealing with criminals. Right? He's not sitting with salihin and mu'min. He's sitting with individuals who are likely guilty of some sort of crime. He would treat them with humility. وَيَسْتَقْرِضُ لِلْمُحْتَاجِ. This is amazing. Yusuf alayhi salam in the prison, he would get loans to help people who were in need. So the prisoners, they might have families. And especially if this is the husband who is the breadwinner is in prison, and the family is now deprived of that financial support. Yusuf would use his influence, because for many years he was living in the palace. The prison guards, they knew him. So he would sometimes use his influence from within the prison to take care of the financial needs of the families of the prisoners. He would guarantee loans as a prisoner. وَيَسْتَقْرِضُ لِلْمُحْتَاجِ وَيُعِينُ الضَّعِيفِ. If he saw that there was someone who was weak, that needed help, he would help him. In another narration, Imam al-Sadiq says, كَانَ يَقُومُ عَلَى الْمَرِيضِ. The prison did not have any nurse, or if it did, you have so many prisoners. Anyone who was sick, Yusuf alayhi salam would take care of them. He would try to get them food. He would try to get them medicine. He would look after them. وَيَلْتَمِسُ الْمُحْتَاجِ. If anyone had any type of need, he would try to help them. وَيُوَسِّعُ عَلَى الْمَحْبُوسِ. And he would try to make prison comfortable for them. Some of the inmates were presumably depressed. He would try to lift their spirits. He would try to give them hope. So even though he is probably the only one who has been imprisoned as an innocent person, yet he is still thinking about others. Look at the selflessness of Yusuf alayhi salam. So they ask these two prisoners who seem to be close to him, they're his cellmates, they ask him to interpret these dreams. Yusuf alayhi salam in ayah 37, what does he say? قَالَ لَا يَأْتِيكُمَا طَعَامٌ تُرْزَقَانِ إِلَّا نَبَّأْتُكُمَا بِتَأْوِيلِ قَبْلَ أَن يَأْتِيَكُمَا. Yusuf alayhi salam is in prison with these individuals who are mushrikeen. They're basically idol worshippers. And they want him to interpret these dreams. Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, I'm going to interpret the dreams for you, but not right now. But I promise you, I will give you all of the information that you need before our next meal comes. Now in prison, you don't have any clocks anywhere. Presumably they can't even see the outdoors. They would calculate the time based on when they would bring food. So Yusuf alayhi salam, he says to them that I'm going to tell you the interpretation of these dreams before the next meal comes and you eat from it. But I want to tell you something else. He says when he senses that these cellmates, these prisoners are impressed with his knowledge, they recognize that he's unique. SubhanAllah, if you look at the story of Yusuf, anyone who comes in contact with him, they realize that he's special. His father through the dream, Aziz of Misr in the slave market, his brothers, Zulaykha. Anyone who comes in contact with Yusuf, they realize that there's something special about this man. So these prisoners, they recognize that he has special knowledge. They're probably thinking, is this guy an astrologer? Is he a magician? What is he? He says to them, before he interprets their dreams, he takes advantage of this opportunity to call them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You see, he has this audience. They want to know the interpretation of the dream. Before he shares that with them, he gives them more important knowledge. And that is the knowledge of Allah. So what does he say? ذَلِكُمَا مِمَّا عَلَّمَنِي رَبِّي. This knowledge that you are impressed with, this knowledge, this ability that I have to interpret dreams, this is not a skill that I learned from an astrologer. This is knowledge that has been given to me by my Lord. So now, Yusuf alayhi salam begins his da'wah in prison. Now, when they hear this, my Lord taught me this knowledge. Okay, what makes you so special? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala favor you with this unique knowledge? He explains, إِنِّي تَرَكْتُ مِلَّةَ قَوْمٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِاللَّهِ وَهُمْ بِالْآخِرَةِ هُمْ كَافِرُونَ. He says that I turned away from the religion of a people who do not believe in Allah and who reject the hereafter. The reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed me is because I had the strength, I had the fortitude, I had the confidence to reject the prevailing ideology. I did not have an inferiority complex. I was confident in my belief. I did not succumb to the majority belief. I turned away. I consciously rejected the false religion of the people of this household, the people of this land. Inni taraktu millata qawmin. It was a conscious decision to reject this false religion. So what does he do? He begins with tawheed. It's very interesting that Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, I'll tell you the interpretation of the dreams before the food comes. So he knows that he has a very limited amount of time. But Yusuf alayhi salam understands that when you want to call people to Allah, be brief and be concise. He doesn't give a long, drawn-out speech. He doesn't bore them. He's efficient. And this is a lesson for us. You don't need to give hours and hours of speeches to enlighten people. Sometimes a few words that are uttered in an eloquent way is enough, is sufficient to open up people's eyes. So he starts with tawheed. He rejects the religion of these people. So what religion does he follow? He says, وَاتَّبَعْتُ مِلَّةَ آبَائِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَإِسْحَاقَ وَيَعْقُوبَ. In a matter of minutes, he touches on tawheed, nubuwwah, and ma'ad, which are the pillars of the religion. He says, I am following the religion of my forefathers. What I am doing is knowledge that I have inherited from my great-grandfather, my grandfather, and my father. Meaning, my knowledge is connected to revelation. It's not baseless. I have, if we want to use hadith terminology, I have a very reliable chain. I have a strong sanad, which takes me back to an infallible source of knowledge. ما كان لنا أن نشرك بالله من شيء. It is not befitting that we ascribe any partner to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We don't commit shirk in the least. ذَلِكَ مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْنَا. The fact that we believe in one God, that we worship one God, that we obey and we submit to one God, our understanding of Tawheed, the knowledge of Allah's oneness, this is a fadl from Allah. This is a bounty. This is a grace. This is a ni'mah. You see, Yusuf alayhi salam is presenting religion in a very attractive language. He doesn't say, let me invite you to Tawheed. Tawheed has all of these different branches. He says, no, the oneness of God is a blessing. Because when a person believes in one God, he is honored. He is given dignity. ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْنَا وَعَلَى النَّاسِ. Because to worship anything other than Allah is to humiliate yourself, is to turn to something that is needy and dependent, just like you and I. We only worship that all-powerful being. We don't worship anything that is less, because that would be tantamount to humiliation, indignity. ذَلِكَ مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ عَلَيْنَا وَعَلَى النَّاسِ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَشْكُرُونَ. But most people, they don't understand. They don't understand that Tawheed is a ni'mah. To come to the realization that you have one God, that you have one Lord, that you have one provider who calls you to Him, they don't realize. They're not grateful for this ni'mah. Now what's interesting is that when you reflect on these ayat, you notice Yusuf alayhi salam is not complaining about being wrongly convicted. He's not turning to his cellmates and saying, do you know what happened to me? When I was a child, my brothers threw me in a well. And after I was thrown into a well, I was sold into slavery. And then I was purchased by the Minister of Finance. And you know what she did to me? That I met this lady named Zulaykha. There's no negativity. He's only speaking about the positives. He's in prison, but he sees himself as being blessed because he has a relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, look at how God has blessed us, that we have a relationship with Allah Azza wa Jal. This reminds me of a narration where Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, Allahumma salli, and this is recorded by Shaykh At-Tusi in his Amali. He says, a man one day came to my father, Imam al-Sadiq, and he was complaining that he was poor. So he came to my father and he said, Ya ibn Rasulullah, I'm poor. I'm destitute. The Imam says, no, you're not poor. So the man says, oh Imam, wallahi I'm poor. I have nothing. I'm poor. And then he started to explain to the Imam how dire his financial situation was. And then the Imam al-Sadiq, he says to this man, who's complaining about poverty, and he says, I have nothing, I'm down and out. The Imam says, خبرني لو أعطيت بالبراءة منا 100 دينار كنت تأخذ. The Imam asked him, if someone were to offer you 100 gold coins to disassociate from us Ahlul Bayt, would you do it? The man said, Wallahi, I would never do that. The Imam says, how about if you are offered 1,000 dinars? He says, Wallahi, I would never disassociate from you Ahlul Bayt. The Imam says, how about 5,000, 10,000? And the number keeps going up. And the man is swearing by Allah, Wallahi, I would never disassociate from you, Ahlul Bayt. The Imam alayhi salam, he says to him, من معه سلعة يعطى بها هذا المال لا يبيعها هو فقير. The Imam says, a person who has something that is so valuable that he would not sell it for tens of thousands of dinars, you consider such a person to be poor? Yes, financially you might be struggling, but you have something that is worth the dunya and everything in it, and that is the guidance from Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. So Yusuf alayhi salam is the same. He has nothing. Now he's a prisoner. But he sees himself as a recipient of Allah's fadl. Allah has given me something so valuable, and that is His ma'rifah. I know my Lord. I have a relationship with Him. In ayah 39, he continues speaking to his cellmates. Ya sahibay as-sijn, O my two companions. And notice that in the Quran, sahib doesn't necessarily mean believer. Here, the ashab of Yusuf they're mushrikeen, they're disbelievers. Ya sahibay as-sijn, أأرباب متفرقون خير أم الله الواحد القهار. Look at the da'wah style of Yusuf. It's very engaging. He starts by talking about what he rejected. He speaks about his own spiritual journey. And then he asks them a rhetorical question. What is better? Various gods or one all-powerful God? If there were multiple gods in this universe, there would be a conflict of interest. There would be rivalries. Even if you look at Greek mythology, Roman mythology, you look at all of their religious literature is wars and battles between these gods. What's better? Various gods who are vying for power, who are competing, or one Lord? You know, in the fitrah of the human being, we have this understanding that there needs to be one final authority. When there's a country, there's one king, there's one president, one prime minister. When there's a company, there is one CEO. You expect this universe, with all of its complexity, to be governed by multiple gods? And even psychologically, what do you do if one God wants something from you and another God wants something else? It creates turmoil. It brings much more tranquility to know that I have one Lord who is all-powerful, who knows about all of my needs. So he uses this very intuitive argument with them, something that they recognize intuitively. And then, what does he do? He starts off his da'wah very gentle, indirect, using rhetorical questions, and then he becomes more direct. In ayah 40, ما تعبدون من دونه إلا أسماء سميتموها أنتم وآباؤكم. What you worship is nothing but names that you and your forefathers fabricated. Meaning, your religion is based on fiction. It's not based on knowledge. My religion is based on what I inherited from Yaqub, from Ishaq, from Ibrahim. There is a clear line connecting me to revelation. Whereas you guys are just practicing and worshiping things that have no reality. And yes, this is what your forefathers have worshipped, but just because it was practiced by your forefathers, it doesn't mean that it has any basis in reality. ما أنزل الله بها من سلطان إن الحكم إلا لله. There is no basis. Allah has not sent down anything that confirms what you're practicing. إن الحكم إلا لله. Commands are only for Allah to give. And what is the primary command that Allah Azza wa Jal has given? أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّاهُ. That you should worship none other than Allah. You know, you look at Yusuf. Yusuf is the only monotheist in Egypt. And he speaks and he critiques the prevailing ideology with so much confidence. This shows you that a mu'min should not have an inferiority complex. Even in prison, in that vulnerable position, he's surrounded by criminals who are all mushrikeen, yet he's not hiding his faith. He's not weak. He's composed, he's dignified, he's presenting strong arguments. ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ. That is the upright religion. وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. This is the upright religion. And following this religion makes you upright. Now, the ayah after this doesn't mention the effect of his da'wah. Did these prisoners convert or did they remain as mushrikeen? Allah doesn't tell us. Why? It seems that Allah wants us to focus on our duty. Usually when we invite people to Islam, we become so concerned with, are they going to convert? Did they convert? Are they going to become Muslim? Are they going to believe? There's no mention of whether they submitted or not. Because our job is not to convert people. Our job is to convey the message. وَمَا عَلَيْنَا إِلَّا الْبَلَاغُ الْمُبِينَ. Ayah 41. يَا صَاحِبَيَ السِّجْنِ. Now he gives them the interpretation of their dreams. Because he knows that one of them is going to die. And as a favor to him, he wants to guide him so that at least he dies as a believer. يَا صَاحِبَيَ السِّجْنِ أَمَّا أَحَدُكُمَا فَيَسْقِي رَبَّهُ خَمْرًا. He starts with the good news. One of you is going to be released from prison. One of you will serve his master, he will serve the king, wine once again. وَأَمَّا الْآخَرُ فَيُصْلَبُ فَتَأْكُلُ الطَّيْرُ مِنْ رَأْسِهِ. As for the other, the one who had the dream of bread on your head, where the birds are eating from it, you're going to be crucified. You're going to be executed. قُضِيَ الْأَمْرُ الَّذِي فِيهِ تَسْتَفْتِيَانِ. A few days pass, the prisoner guards, they show up. And they announce that the baker is to be crucified. They had some sort of evidence that he indeed was trying to poison the king. And just as Yusuf prophesied, he was crucified. That same day, the guards return and they come for the king's cupbearer. And they announce to him that you have been pardoned. Right? You were not guilty of the crime that you were accused of. And you are to resume your previous position immediately. He was the one who would serve drinks to the wine and his ministers. Ayah number 42. Now the cupbearer is leaving prison. وَقَالَ لِلَّذِي ظَنَّ أَنَّهُ نَاجٍ مِّنْهُ مَذْكُرْنِي عِنْدَ رَبِّكَ. The cupbearer is leaving. They spent many years together. They spent a good amount of time together. He says to the cupbearer, remember me with your master. Remind him that I am here. فَأَنْسَاهُ الشَّيْطَانُ ذِكْرَ رَبِّهِ. The shaitan made the cupbearer forget. He forgot about Yusuf alayhi salam. فَلَبِثَ فِي السِّجْنِ بِضْعَ سِنِينَ. Because the cupbearer forgot to mention Yusuf's wrongful conviction, Yusuf ends up staying in prison for a number of years. The narrations say that he remains for 7 years in prison. This is not a short period. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Can I just have 10 minutes of your time? Because I want to make sure that we finish the story by the time I leave. Otherwise, it's going to be very sad if we end in the middle of the story. Sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Yusuf alayhi salam, he stays in prison now. And his situation in prison is very difficult. Aziz and Zulaykha, they still have control over what's happening in the prison. You can imagine that he's not being given the best of food. And we have a narration where, and it's mentioned in Kitab al-Kafi, where Imam al-Sadiq says that the only thing that was being given to Yusuf in prison in terms of food was dry bread and water. That was his food. And sometimes the bread was so old that it was like a rock. It was so difficult to break. And in this situation, you find that Imam al-Sadiq says, إِنَّ يُوسُفَ لَمَّا أَنْ كَانَ فِي السِّجْنِ شَكَى إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ أَكْلَ الْخُبْزِ وَحْدَهُ. That Yusuf complained to Allah about the condition of his food. Look at the tawheedi outlook of Yusuf. Even his food, the first one he complains to is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the hadith says that Allah inspires Yusuf to take this tough bread and put it in a bowl. And he's inspired to pour water on this bowl and sprinkle some salt. And through a mu'jiza, the bowl turns into a hot stew. And he shares it with his inmates. Now, Yusuf alayhi salam, as the years go by, and we have to understand that when you are innocent and you're in prison, it's not like when you're guilty and in prison. When you're guilty, you feel like, okay, I'm paying for my crime. But when you're innocent, and Yusuf alayhi salam, remember, he was not given a fixed time for imprisonment. He's sent into prison for as long as it takes for people to forget about the scandal. This could be for the rest of his life. So he doesn't see any light at the end of the tunnel. He sees people come in and out of prison, and he's still there. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, he was asked by Abu Basir. Abu Basir asked the Imam, what was the dua that Yusuf used to recite? Yusuf faced a lot of difficulties in his life. What supplication did he recite? The Imam says, Inna du'a Yusuf kana kathira. Imam says that Yusuf used to recite many du'as. He faced so many challenges. لكنه لما اشتد عليه الحبس خر ساجدا. But in prison, the situation was so difficult that he went into sujood. And he said, اللهم إن كانت الذنوب قد أخلقت وجهي عندك فلن ترفع لي إليك صوتا فأنا أتوجه إليك بوجه الشيخ يعقوب. Yusuf is in sujood. He says, Oh Allah, if you have turned away from me because of mistakes that I have made, if my voice is not reaching you as a result of my own shortcomings, then I turn to you and I ask you for the sake of that old man, Yaqub. He's doing tawassul through Yaqub alayhi salam. Jibra'il appears. He says to Yusuf, Inna Allah abtalaka wa abtala abak. Oh Yusuf, Allah is testing you and He's also testing your father. You are going through a difficulty. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يُنْجِيكَ مِنْ هَذَا السِّجْنِ. But I have good news for you, oh Yusuf. You're not going to die here. You're not going to die in this prison. Allah Azza wa Jal, He's going to rescue you from this prison. But there's a dua that you have to recite. And Jibra'il teaches him the recitation of the salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Jibra'il, after he recites this dua, Jibra'il says to Yusuf that you will be released in 3 days. The narration says that the night that he made that dua in prison, that is the same night that the king had the dream that he had. And inshallah tomorrow night we'll speak about the dream of the king. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.